You're easily replaceable. Those 4 words hit me like a slap. From a hand wearing corporate rings, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone ordering coffee. Decaf, no foam, extra, dismissive, by Vanessa, my manager of 3 years, as she sat there in the sterile conference room, picking lint off her blazer, like my career was just another thread to be discarded. I'd walked into that exit interview thinking it would be professional, maybe even cordial. After all, I'd given them everything 60-hour weeks during the product launch crisis. The time I saved their biggest client relationship when their own account manager ghosted for a week straight. The system overhaul. I designed that cut processing time by 40%, all documented, all successful, all apparently meaningless. Because here sat Vanessa in her discount power suit, telling me I was disposable, like a paper coffee cup she'd already used up. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. Typical Tuesday at Holloway Corporation, where ambition went to die slowly, and middle managers went to collect paychecks for managing people who actually knew how to do things. Vanessa had that particular brand of corporate smugness that comes from failing upward for so long. You forget what competence looks like. She leaned back in her ergonomic throne, adjusting her reading glasses, like she was about to deliver wisdom from the mountaintop. Instead of recycled HR talking points, we've decided to restructure your role, she said, using the royal we like. She was speaking for anyone other than her own insecurity. And frankly, your position has become redundant in our new operational framework. I blinked slowly, letting the corporate doublespeak wash over me. Like lukewarm shower water, redundant. I repeated the word, tasting bitter on my tongue. Yes, she said, brightening, like she'd just explained quantum physics to a toddler. We're streamlining our technical operations, and your skill set, while valuable, doesn't align with our forward-thinking, strategic initiatives. I almost laughed right there in her face, because my skill set was the only thing keeping their forward-thinking strategic initiatives from collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. But I didn't laugh. I just nodded, like a good little employee, because sometimes you have to let people finish digging their own graves before you hand them the shovel. She continued her monologue about operational efficiency and resource optimization, while I sat there mentally cataloging every disaster I'd prevented, every crisis I'd solved, every weekend I'd sacrificed to keep their systems running, while she took credit in quarterly reviews. That's when she dropped the nuclear bomb of corporate condescension wrapped in a smile, so fake it could have been used as evidence in a fraud trial. The reality is, she said, leaning forward with practiced empathy, you're easily replaceable. We have several junior developers who can handle your responsibilities at a fraction of the cost. It's just good business. The silence that followed was deafening, except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the sound of my professional respect for her evaporating like morning dew in hell. I didn't flinch, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. Just nodded once, like she'd told me the weather forecast, and said, understood loud and clear. But inside, something crystallized, not anger exactly, more like clarity, the kind that comes when someone finally shows you exactly who they are, without the corporate mask slipping, just falling clean off and landing with a wet thud on the conference room carpet. The meeting lasted another 17 minutes of procedural nonsense, badge return, laptop handoff, the usual choreography of institutional abandonment. Vanessa checked her phone twice during my transition. Briefing. The briefing about projects that would collapse without proper handover systems that would fail, authentication protocols that would break. But hey, easily replaceable, right as I walked out with my cardboard box of desk plants and coffee-stained notebooks. I felt lighter than I had in months, not because I was leaving, but because I finally understood the game they thought they were playing, and more importantly, the game I was about to start playing. Back at home, I sat on my kitchen floor with my laptop and a bottle of wine that cost more than Vanessa's monthly manicure budget, and started making lists, not job applications, not networking outreach, but lists of every client I'd personally managed, every vendor relationship I'd built, every process I'd streamlined that kept their little empire running while they took credit and bonuses. The first list was client contacts, 47 names, phone numbers, email addresses, direct lines to decision makers who knew my voice, who trusted my recommendations, who'd been calling the main line for 3 years, asking specifically for me only to get transferred to Vanessa, who'd pretend she understood their technical requirements while frantically messaging me for the real answers. The second list was systems I'd designed or maintained, 83 different processes, ranging from basic data entry, automation, to complex integration protocols that connected Holloway systems with their major clients. Most of these systems had my digital fingerprints all over them, custom code, comments written in my personal shorthand documentation that made perfect sense to me and would look like ancient hieroglyphics to anyone else. The third list was the most interesting, the disasters that would inevitably happen when those systems started failing, without someone who understood how they actually worked. Authentication timeouts that occurred every 90 days, database maintenance protocols that needed manual intervention, integration updates that required specific sequencing to avoid data corruption backup, verification processes that couldn't be automated because the client systems were too diverse. Turns out when you're the person doing actual work, instead of managing the people doing actual work, you accumulate a lot of leverage. You just don't realize it until someone stupid enough to call you replaceable forces you to inventory your own power. I opened my contacts folder, the real one, not the sanitized, LinkedIn connections, but the phone numbers that represented actual relationships built over late-night troubleshooting calls, emergency weekend fixes, collaborative problem-solving sessions that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchy and everything to do with mutual respect between competent professionals. That night, I didn't send any emails, didn't make any calls, just sat there with my wine and my lists and let myself imagine what would happen when those clients realized their reliable point of contact had been deemed easily replaceable by someone who couldn't tell the difference between a database and a spreadsheet. The satisfaction was already starting to taste better than the wine. If you're thinking, this sounds too calculated, you've probably never had 3 years of competent work dismissed by someone whose biggest professional achievement was learning to use the CC function in Outlook. But hey, would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button, because 97% of people watching this probably have their own Vanessa story, and misery loves company, but revenge loves precision. The first domino fell on a Tuesday, exactly 8 days after Vanessa's little exit interview performance. I was in a coffee shop 3 blocks from my old office, nursing a latte that actually tasted like coffee, instead of the brown water Holloway's break room dispensed, when my phone buzzed, unknown number, with the area code I recognized immediately. "Hey, is this Jade? This is Patricia from Zenith Solutions. I know you left Holloway Corp, but we've got a situation, and honestly, you're the only one who ever actually understood our integration requirements." Patricia's voice had that particular strain that comes from dealing with technical problems while surrounded by people who think troubleshooting means turning something off and on again. I smiled into my coffee cup because Patricia was the CTO of one of Holloway's biggest accounts, responsible for about 15% of their quarterly revenue and approximately 30% of Vanessa's performance metrics. "We had a systems failure last night," Patricia continued, "and when I called your old number this morning, some woman named Vanessa tried to tell me she could handle it, but she kept asking me to repeat basic terminology like she'd never heard of API protocols before. She actually asked me to spell out JSON. I almost choked on my latte because that was exactly the kind of thing Vanessa would do. Pretend to understand technical concepts while frantically Googling acronyms and hoping nobody noticed. "I'm sorry to hear about the system failure," I said, maintaining perfect professional composure. "What kind of timeline are you working with?" "We need it fixed by Friday," Patricia said, "or we're looking at a complete service disruption. Our legal team is already drafting breach notices. If Holloway can't deliver." That's when I knew this wasn't just karma. This was opportunity, served on a silver platter with a side of corporate incompetence. I happened to be consulting independently. Now I told her, and I'd be happy to take a look at your integration issues. My rate is $350 per hour, but I guarantee the work gets done right the first time. She didn't even hesitate. "Done," she said. "Can you start today by noon?" I was sitting in Zenith's conference room with a consulting contract worth more than my old monthly salary, reviewing the exact same systems I designed for them 2 years ago, while Vanessa was probably explaining to her boss why their biggest client was suddenly questioning Holloway's competence. The irony was so sweet, I could taste it, like dessert wine. The problem wasn't even complex. A misconfigured update had corrupted the data sync process, the kind of issue I could fix in my sleep, because I'd built the original architecture. But to anyone else, anyone who hadn't spent 3 years learning every quirk and workaround, it would look like quantum physics, written in ancient hieroglyphics. I fixed it in 6 hours. What would have taken Holloway's team 6 days if they figured it out at all? Patricia walked me out personally, shaking my hand like I'd just performed surgery on her firstborn. "You saved our entire quarter," she said, then paused before adding, "You know, we've been thinking about bringing our technical consulting in-house. Someone who really understands our systems, someone we can trust." The offer came with a salary that made my old paycheck look like lunch money, full benefits, equity options, and the kind of respect I'd been craving for 3 years, while Vanessa treated me like office furniture that occasionally had opinions. The real chaos started the next morning when I got a call from Marcus Webb, the head of operations at Holloway, and Vanessa's direct supervisor. His voice had that strained quality of someone trying to sound calm while their professional world imploded. "Jade," he said, forcing joviality, "we heard about the Zenith contract. Congratulations. But we've got a situation here, and we could really use your expertise." He paused, like he was swallowing glass temporarily. "Of course, just until we get back on our feet." I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Sure, Marcus," I said finally. "What's the situation?" 3 more clients had called that morning. He admitted each one with technical issues, all asking specifically for me. When they were told I was no longer available, 2 of them immediately escalated to breach of contract discussions. The third one, Meridian Industries had just canceled their renewal, worth about $2 million annually. Apparently, they'd been unhappy with service quality for months, and my departure was the final straw. Marcus tried to sound casual, like he was discussing weekend plans, but I could hear the panic bleeding through his professional veneer. "What would it take to bring you back?" he asked. "As a contractor." Obviously, we could discuss rates. I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But then I remembered 3 years of Vanessa taking credit for my work. 3 years of being passed over for promotions because I wasn't good at office politics. 3 years of making other people look competent, while they called me easily replaceable. "My consulting rate is $500 an hour," I said calmly. "Minimum engagement of 40 hours per week. 12-week contract, paid in advance, non-negotiable." The silence stretched so long, I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he cleared his throat. That's significantly above market rate." "Is it?" I asked, because Zenith didn't seem to think so. Neither did Meridian when they called me yesterday, asking about a potential consulting arrangement. Marcus agreed to the terms that afternoon. By Thursday, I was back in the Holloway building, but this time I wasn't sneaking through the side entrance with a faded employee badge. I walked through the main lobby like I owned the place, which in a very real sense I now did. Contractor badges have a different color scheme, gold instead of blue. And when you're being paid more per hour than most people make per day, that gold feels like exactly what it represents: power. The first person I saw was Trevor from accounting, the guy who'd always been friendly, but never quite friendly enough to risk association with someone below his pay grade. Now, he practically sprinted across the lobby, hand extended, like we were old war buddies. "Jade," he said, pumping my hand, "heard you were coming back as a consultant. That's amazing, absolutely amazing." His enthusiasm was so forced, it sounded like he was reading from a hostage note. But I smiled and played along. "Thanks, Trevor. Good to be back." The elevator ride to the 15th floor was silent, except for the barely audible breathing of the 3 other people who'd suddenly found the floor numbers fascinating enough to stare at for the entire journey. News travels fast. In corporate environments, especially news about someone returning, with enough leverage to make executives sweat. The conference room was packed when I arrived. Marcus sat at the head of the table, flanked by the CFO, the head of client relations, and conspicuously absent Vanessa. Apparently, she was dealing with a family emergency that had come up very suddenly that morning, which was corporate speak for hiding, until the awkwardness blew over the CFO, a thin man with the personality of wet cardboard, laid out the situation with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "We've had some challenges with client retention," he said, as if those challenges weren't directly tied to their decision to let their most competent technical resource walk out the door. "Several key accounts have expressed concerns about service continuity, and we need to ensure a smooth transition going forward." Translation: they needed me to fix the disasters that had been brewing since I left, and they needed me to do it without making them look like the incompetent middle managers they actually were. The first week back was surreal, walking through hallways where I'd once been invisible. Now, having people I'd never spoken to suddenly know my name and want to grab coffee. The junior developers who'd previously treated me like office furniture were suddenly asking for my advice on everything from technical architecture to career development. The same systems I'd built and maintained for years were now being treated like archaeological artifacts that only I could decipher. Because, surprise, when you fire the person who designed your entire technical infrastructure, it turns out they actually were pretty difficult to replace. But the real satisfaction came from watching Vanessa try to navigate the new power dynamic. When she finally returned from her convenient family emergency, she found herself in the impossible position of managing someone who was now being paid more than her to do the work she'd never been able to do herself. Our first interaction was a masterclass in corporate theater. She appeared at my temporary office door on Friday afternoon, wearing a smile so forced it looked like it might crack her face and shatter on the floor. "Jade," she said, like we were old friends. "Hi, Vanessa," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "How's the family emergency?" She paused just long enough for me to know she'd caught the subtle emphasis. "Better, thanks," she said, then cleared her throat. "I wanted to touch base about the Meridian project and coordinate our approach." "Coordinate," I repeated, finally, looking at her with the kind of polite confusion usually reserved for people speaking foreign languages. "I'm consulting directly with Meridian's technical team. Your involvement would just add unnecessary complexity." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish, suddenly realizing it was out of water. "But I'm the account manager," she said weakly, "and I'm the consultant they're paying for." She stood there for a long moment, probably calculating how much political capital she'd spent, calling me easily replaceable versus how much she'd need to spend, admitting she'd been wrong. The math clearly wasn't working out in her favor. The second phase of my consulting contract involved something Marcus called knowledge documentation, which was corporate speak for, "Please write down everything you know so we can fire you again without consequence." But here's the thing about documentation. When you're the person who built the systems, you get to decide how much detail to include and in what order, and whether the documentation is actually useful to anyone who didn't spend 3 years living inside the technical architecture. I delivered exactly what was requested: comprehensive documentation of every system, every process, every integration point, hundreds of pages of technically accurate, completely useless information, written in the kind of dense, technical language that would make a PhD dissertation look like a children's book. Anyone reading it would understand exactly what each component did, but would have no idea how they worked together, or why they were designed that way, or what would happen if you changed any of the configurations. It was like giving someone a recipe that listed every ingredient and cooking time, but forgot to mention you needed to preheat the oven, or that the measurements were in metric, or that the dish was supposed to be served cold. Malicious compliance, disguised as thoroughness, my favorite kind of professional revenge. Meanwhile, my actual work, the work they were paying me $500 an hour to perform, was fixing the cascading failures that had been building. Since my departure, every day brought new crises: client complaints, system outages, integration failures that required my specific knowledge to resolve. Vanessa would sit in meetings, nodding along as I explained technical concepts she'd never bothered to learn, occasionally interjecting with phrases like, "We should circle back on that," or "Let's take this offline," which fooled nobody and impressed even fewer people. The clients weren't buying her act either. Patricia from Zenith had started CCing me directly on all technical communications, effectively cutting Vanessa out of the loop entirely. Meridian's technical director had explicitly requested that all future meetings include me, and specifically not include anyone from Holloway's account management team. Even Trevor, from accounting, who'd been so enthusiastic about my return, started treating Vanessa like she was carrying something contagious. The writing was on the wall, written in red ink and highlighted in corporate yellow. But some people are remarkably skilled at not reading even the most obvious signs. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be my final week of consultation. Vanessa had scheduled a team meeting to discuss transition planning, which was her way of trying to reassert authority over processes she'd never understood in the first place. She opened the meeting with a PowerPoint presentation titled Maintaining Excellence in Technical Delivery that was so generic it could have been about any industry, any company, any basic function of human competence. Slide 3 included a bullet point about leveraging core competencies for optimal outcomes, which translated to English meant absolutely nothing. She clicked through slide after slide of business school buzzwords, while I sat there, wondering if she actually believed this performance would convince anyone. She was capable of managing technical relationships. Without me, finally, she reached the slide titled Moving Forward, Sustainable Practices, and looked directly at me with what she probably thought was authority. "Jade," she said, "we appreciate everything you've brought to this transition, and we're confident our internal team can maintain the high standards our clients expect going forward." I nodded politely. "Great to hear it," I said, then opened my laptop and projected my own presentation onto the conference room screen without asking permission. The first slide read, Client Retention Analysis, Post-Departure. The second slide showed a graph with dates on the x-axis and client satisfaction scores on the y-axis. There was a very clear, very dramatic drop that corresponded exactly with my departure date. The third slide listed every client complaint, technical failure, and service disruption that had occurred in the 3 weeks since I'd left, each one categorized by type severity and projected revenue impact. The fourth slide showed projected losses if current trends continued through the end of the quarter. The number had more zeros than Vanessa's annual salary. The room went quiet, except for the sound of people shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. "Marcus cleared his throat, Jade," he said, carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" I clicked to the next slide, which contained a single sentence. "My consulting contract expires tomorrow, and I won't be renewing." The silence that followed was the kind that usually precedes natural disasters or hostile takeovers. Then, the questions started all at once. What about the Meridian integration? Who's going to handle the Zenith maintenance contract? What happens when the quarterly audit systems need updating? I answered each question with the same calm professionalism I'd shown for 3 years. Except now, I wasn't offering solutions. I was simply confirming that yes, these were all problems, and no, I wouldn't be available to fix them. The meeting ended with Marcus asking if we could discuss extending my contract privately, which was code for "please name your price, because we're about to lose everything." Vanessa sat frozen in her chair, staring at her laptop screen, like it might suddenly display instructions for how to manage technical systems. She'd never bothered to understand. The offer Marcus made was impressive enough to buy a small house or a very nice car, but I'd already accepted Zenith's permanent position, along with equity in a company that actually valued competence over corporate theater. I declined politely, professionally, and with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for watching karma work overtime on someone who really deserved it. My last day at Holloway was surreal. People who'd never acknowledged my existence, suddenly wanted to wish me well. Trevor from accounting gave me a coffee mug with a motivational quote about success. Junior developers asked for my contact information. The CFO himself stopped by to shake my hand and make vague comments about keeping doors open for future opportunities. But the moment I'd been waiting for came at exactly 3:47 p.m. when Vanessa appeared at my temporary office door. One final time, she looked different, smaller somehow, like someone had let the air out of her professional confidence. The power suit was the same, but it hung on her differently, like costume instead of armor. "Jade," she said quietly. I wanted to apologize. I looked up from packing my laptop, expecting some corporate non-apology about miscommunication or different perspectives. Instead, she said something that actually surprised me. "I was wrong about you being easily replaceable." And I was wrong to say it. I nodded once. "Thanks, Vanessa." She hesitated, like she wanted to say more, then seemed to think better of it. "Good luck with everything," she said finally, and walked away. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I'd imagined. No tears, no begging, no acknowledgement of the professional destruction she'd brought on herself. Just a quiet admission that she'd been wrong, which somehow felt more satisfying than any theatrical breakdown could have been. As I walked out of Holloway Corporation for the last time, I didn't look back, because there was nothing worth seeing behind me. Just a building full of people who'd confused hierarchy with competence, authority with ability, and loyalty with weakness. Vanessa had been right about one thing. I was easily replaceable, at least in her mind, but what she'd failed to understand was that some people are only replaceable if you can find someone else who actually knows how to do the job. And as I just demonstrated to the tune of several $1,000,000 in lost revenue, that replacement was a lot harder to find than she'd anticipated. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office at Zenith, looking out at a view that cost more than Vanessa's annual salary, when Patricia knocked on my door with a smile and a bottle of champagne. "We just signed the Meridian integration contract," she said. $3 million over 2 years. "Thanks to the architecture you designed." Apparently, they were so impressed with our technical capabilities, they're consolidating all their systems management with us. I opened the champagne and poured 2 glasses as Patricia continued. "Oh, and there's something else," she said with a grin. "Holloway just lost their 3rd major client this quarter. Word is they're having some serious technical difficulties, and their account management team isn't exactly inspiring confidence." "We raised our glasses to incompetence," I said. "And the people who enable it." Patricia laughed, and to the satisfaction of proving them wrong in the most profitable way possible. We drank to that too, because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting promoted beyond the reach of people who never understood your value in the first place. Thanks for watching, you corporate warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old manager, then you're on your own.